Hello and welcome to another edition of Motor Cars Enthusiasts. On this particular episode of Motor Cars, we're going to do a fat, bald perspective. We're going to tell you what I think, and something that's kind of occupied my mind space for several days while wandering around the countryside after giving an encounter with a friend of mine who knows I'm a big motorsports fan. This guy is somewhat of a NASCAR fan, but doesn't know a whole lot about motorsports around the world. But he came up to me and said, "Hey, I was watching the Rio Olympics. Do you know who Lewis Hamilton is?" Well, of course I know who Lewis Hamilton is. World Championship leader inside of Formula One, defending world champion in Formula One. The fact that Lewis Hamilton is quite the globetrotter, especially since he's kind of without girlfriend after he left that long-term relationship he had with the last girl. He's been someone of the globetrotter who's actually wandering around some pretty high-end circles with some high-profile friends. So the fact that he was in Rio is no huge surprise. Now, the fact that the actual television provider here for the U.S. covering the Olympics is the same provider that's actually doing Formula One coverage, no real surprise that they interviewed the young Lewis Hamilton. The interviewer said something that got this friend of mine a little bit riled up when he called Lewis Hamilton the greatest race car driver of all time, which definitely got this man upset. When he told me, he says, "Do you think Lewis Hamilton is the greatest race car driver of all time?" Not really. I mean, no doubt he's fantastic. He's an amazing talent, a heck of a race car driver. The greatest of all time is very difficult to say. Who exactly could it be? And I'm going to come back to this in a little bit. Let's carry on with Lewis Hamilton, though, where he came, or he being this friend of mine, said, being a typical American NASCAR fan, and a lot of NASCAR fans here in the U.S. think the sun sets and rises right there in Daytona Beach, Florida, the home of NASCAR, and all other forms of racing are just also rans. He told me, he said, "Do you think that Lewis Hamilton could win if you put him in a stock car?" And I said, maybe, but it would take a massive amount of time. The stock car is a very specialized piece of equipment, even though technology-wise is not even in the same light year as a Formula One car, but it is a very tricky car to drive and a very tricky car to be able to win in. And he said, "Well, if you don't think that Lewis Hamilton could, I personally," this being this person talking, said, "I think this guy, Tony Stewart, NASCAR champion and a hell of a dirt car racer, could win in a Formula One car first time out," which made me laugh out loud. Now, there's no doubt that Lewis Hamilton is one of the most successful and one of the most talented race car drivers in the world. There's no doubt that Tony Stewart is one of the most talented race car drivers and one of the biggest talents inside of the world. But saying he's going to win the first time out, I said there's no way. And after the laugh, which upset him a tad bit, "Give me one good reason why," was the question he gave me. And I said, "That's an easy one. The sheer fact that Tony Stewart and I have one thing in common, and it may be the only thing that we have in common, is the fact that him and I are both gentlemen of somewhat generous proportion." I know that's a very PC way of saying it, and it's definitely not the way I said it in front of him, but there is no doubt that no Formula One team boss would give him a second look at his current weight. They would definitely make him go on a crash diet. The other thing is the sheer fact that Tony Stewart is of somewhat of an advanced age for a race car driver. In fact, he's in his swan season, his farewell season inside of NASCAR right now. But he does actually want to talk about doing some more motorsports, some things on his bucket list, which has got me pretty excited to see what Mr. Stewart may have up his sleeve. But the trick is Formula One is so different, and the G-forces are so different than from a NASCAR stock car. It would take Stewart, much like it would take Hamilton, 2-3 years easily just to come to grips with the car. And then the trick is you got to climb up the ladder to be in the best car. But just like NASCAR, just like Formula One, there's only a couple, 3 cars that are going to win any given Sunday or any given race weekend. So the trick of either one of these guys flip-flopping, oddly enough, these two did swap rides back in the day when they had the same lubricant sponsor, back when one of them was with a different, well, I think both of them may have been with a different team at the time. This is the trick. It's very difficult to flop in and out of motorsports, and it got me really thinking over the next several days. Who's the most successful person in many genres of racing all over the world? And I only came up with one person. You may know of somebody. You leave it down in the comments if you know of somebody who's done the same. But it's this guy, one Pablo Montoya. JPM actually grew up through junior ranks of motor racing all the way up to Formula One test driver, where he was snatched away to race IndyCar in the United States. Did extremely well, winning the championship, winning the Indianapolis 500. Back to Formula One he went, winning several races, including the Monaco Grand Prix. Then back to NASCAR, where it was somewhat of a struggle, as those vehicles are very difficult to drive, but did win a couple of races inside of a stock car. Then back to IndyCar, where he went right back to winning races, winning the Indianapolis 500. Has a distinction between the same person to win the Indianapolis 500 and the biggest stretch of time between those two wins. He's got the record for that particular run as well. I think JPM is definitely one of the most talented race car drivers, and could argue to say the greatest race car driver of all time, just for the sheer fact that even though IndyCar and NASCAR is not big all over the world, they're still top tier motorsports here in the United States, and have one guy winning all those series is still pretty doggone impressive. But now let's get back to who's the greatest race car driver of all time, which is a very slippery slope and a very tricky question, and is definitely going to cause a little bit of ruffles, as a lot of people are very opinionated, and that's the trick. It's very subjective. Who is the greatest race car driver of all time? If you look at Formula One, you think of Michael Schumacher. Most race wins, most poles, most fast laps, and the like. But is he the greatest race car driver of all time? You think of World Rally, you think of Sebastian Loeb, Sebastian Ogier, even Tommy Mäkinen, or even, Marcus Grönholm. But are these folks the greatest race car drivers? They're kind of somewhat always thought of just because they race on so many different surfaces, as far as ice and snow and tarmac and gravel and dirt and the like. But are they the greatest race car driver of all time? Look at Steve Kinser, the king of the Outlaws. Raced the Outlaw Series for several years, had the most championships, the most race wins, but is he the greatest of all time? NASCAR, you think of Richard Petty, most race wins, most championship, or I guess tied with the most championships, but he was in a way different era than these folks are. So is he the greatest race car driver? NHRA drag racing champ John Force, 16-time world champion in that sport, but is he the greatest? Tom Christensen, who raced the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the most successful man in Le Mans history, but is he the greatest race car driver of all time? It's really tricky, even if you get some lower-end motorsports like the Trans Am Series. Tommy Kendall. Mr. Kendall won every race in a single season. Every race that racing series actually put out. Walking away with the championship. The only guy in professional motorsports to ever do such a thing. But is he the greatest of all time? And I could just go down the list with every racing series anywhere around the world. It's a very tricky question. I think you could safe to say that you could say who's the greatest person in a certain series in a certain time period. But how do you make that distinction of who's the greatest of all time? I guess we could talk about this down in the comments section moving forward. And that's all there was that I thought was worth talking about for this edition of Motor Cars Enthusiasts and the Old Fat Bald Perspective. Don't forget to like us over on the Facebook page. Links down in the show notes. Also, if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, you can do so at any time and get the first dibs on the brand new shows as soon as they come out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again real soon.